He invited the woman he once humiliated to celebrate a child he planned to brag about and expected her to be the empty seat at the center of his triumph. What he didn't expect was a carriage carrying 3 tiny, sleeping miracles and a quiet, implacable man whose fortune and patience eclipsed his arrogance. The room tightened. The cameras clicked. The world waited for the collapse. Before we dig deep into this shocking story, kindly hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on your notification bell so you never miss real stories that reveal the darkest truths and biggest betrayals. Tristan Vale was the kind of man whose name could silence a room. Tall, immaculately groomed, and strikingly handsome, he carried himself with the effortless arrogance of someone who had never heard the word no. His jawline was sharp enough to model for high-end brands, and he did frequently. His deep brown eyes always held a glint of superiority, and the perfectly trimmed beard only added to the aura he projected. Untouchable, flawless, desired. On social media, he was a king. 5 million followers on Instagram, another 3 on TikTok. Between brand deals, lifestyle showcases, motivational speeches, and his famous weekly live streams, Tristan had crafted an empire built on charm, vanity, and carefully controlled narratives. The world adored him. He adored himself even more. But for all his public light, Tristan had a private ledger of small cruelties. He measured people against his expectations and disposed of those who didn't weigh in favorably. One of those measurements had been marriage. Years before the fame, before the expensive suits and the luxury car collection, before the magazine covers and sponsorships, there was someone who knew the man behind the mask. Mara Vale, his ex-wife, and the woman he pushed out of his life as though she were worthless. Her name was Mara Ellison. She never sought a camera. Where Tristan was a stage, Mara was a quiet room with sunlight falling on floorboards. She had a face that invited confidences. Calm, a little weary from emotional labor. Kind in a way that made people unfold around her. She had been reserved by temperament. Not by fear, careful with words, generous with presence. In the circles Tristan inhabited, Mara's restraint read to some as weakness. To those who knew her, it was strength. She loved books and slow tea and mornings when the world was soft. She had wanted children, wanted them in the way some people want to write, or plant trees, a future-making tender insistence. When she and Tristan married, Mara believed in the private covenant of 2 people growing toward something that might outshine either alone. Tristan, however, believed in elevation, marriage as partnership and publicity, a shared platform as much as a private heart. Her soft-spoken nature did not compute with his hunger for spectacle. When tests and appointments returned the painful phrase, words that in the wrong mouth become weapons. Tristan did not choose tenderness. He chose humiliation. In a late-night text that leaked to a tabloid, he put the label barren beside her name and paired it with a laugh emoji. He chose ostracism. He chose to make his rejection public to prove he could. Divorce was an exit on 2 tracks. For Tristan, it was padding from inconvenient, responsibility, and an opportunity to polish his image by controlling the narrative. For Mara, it was a kind of amputated future she had to learn to reimagine. After the separation, Mara retreated into a workroom of her life. Therapy sessions, quiet friends, a night spent reading medical papers with stubborn hope. She filed taxes, learned to make peace with the rooms Tristan once filled, and found small, stubborn joy in routines. The world that had watched her fall apart paid little attention to her rebuilding. It preferred a spectacle, and Tristan had a knack for providing one. Publicly, Mara vanished. Social feeds grew cold. In private, she did something extraordinary but quiet. Seiki refused to let one man's judgment define what she could carry forward. She met people who spoke softly. Doctors who listed options. And one man, careful, reserved, a billionaire by accident more than by bragging, who listened. Alexander St. James was not the sort to post his opinions on trending hashtags or stage camera confessions. He moved through rooms like a man who had learned treasures don't require display. Tall, deliberate, with a face that didn't try to sell anything. Alexander had built his wealth in industries that thrived on discretion, tech, architecture, quiet acquisitions, and investments that smelled faintly of patience. People described him as reserved, but the truth was softer. He was intentional. He'd met Mara at a fundraiser, one of those charity dinners where everyone pretends, to be less hungry for applause. He noticed her because she wasn't trying to be noticed. He noticed her because she listened. Their conversations threaded through practicalities and small ironies, her laugh, the tilt of her head when she considered a thought. He did not make a show of asking her number. He simply found himself on the other side of emails and then dinners, and then a proposal made like a private vow rather than a public performance. Alexander's discretion was the kind of shelter that allowed things forbidden in Tristan's world to bloom, private plans, unpopular choices, the steady financing of medical options Mara had once thought out of reach. Tristan's baby shower was an invitation in more than one sense. An advertisement for a fall campaign, a press-friendly event, an evening for influencers. To network around the spectacle of his impending fatherhood, he sent invitations with his name embossed, some to old friends, some to colleagues and to Mara, with a line that glittered with cruelty. "We would love for you to join us as we celebrate the family we built together." It was calculated. He expected the optics of reconciliation to be his. By inviting Mara, an exile, he could either frame a magnanimous man reuniting with a wronged wife or enjoy the amplified praise for remaining unbothered when she refused. He anticipated either an apology that would elevate him or an absence that would let him dominate the narrative. When Mara received the envelope, she did not slam a door or call a lawyer. She stared at the embossed card, felt the old pain like a bruise, and then folded it into something else. Not a trap, not a performance. She wrote a single line across the RSVP. "I will come." The venue was a sunlit loft converted into the kind of social media-ready dream that lived well on high resolution. Grids, pastel drapes, gold-rimmed chairs, a dessert table that looked like a constellation. Tristan arrived first, perfectly groomed, camera teams in discreet corners. The press had been seated with hints of surprise announcements. Tristan moved with the expectation of applause. Guests arrived with bouquets and applause and carefully prepared congratulations. They took photographs of the cake, adorned in white fondant, and a gold airplane, a private joke about Tristan's future jet-set family, and posted them for likes. The mood was controlled, curated. Then she entered. Mara walked slow but with a composure that unmade assumptions. She wore simple silk, the color of thinned smoke. She had not come to perform. She had come accompanied by Alexander St. James, who moved like a man who had been taught to carry things lightly. The weight of wealth without the need to prove it. He stood half a step behind, hands tucked in pockets, a wall of stillness. And between them, like a miracle compacted into cotton blankets, 3 tiny heads, triplets, slept. In a designer carriage warmed by a parent's touch, 2 girls and a boy, all less than 2 months old, wrapped in the hush of new life. The cameras, which had assumed the spectacle to be Tristan's, adjusted their lens. For a moment, the room registered the shock in the same beat. It was a small, precise intake of breath that spread like wind across a lake. People checked their phones. Tristan's smile had looked civil when Mara had first arrived. Now something in him sharpened, surprise, envy, disbelief. The first flicker of humiliation returned to him like cold water. "Surprise?" someone offered, and the word landed oddly. Mara's voice, when she spoke, was steady. "I thought you should meet them," she said. "They are my children." Tristan's mouth moved as if to say something rehearsed. A joke. A bob, but the practice deserted him. The room waited for his retort. This was the moment where, in his mind, he either reclaimed the narrative or watched someone else write it. Instead, the cameras found Alexander's face, impassive, then tender as he bent and adjusted a blanket on the smallest of the 3. He did not need a microphone to correct anyone's assumptions. He simply existed in private attention. It was a kind of answer Tristan's theatrics could not imitate. The footage that left that venue traveled faster than any carefully constructed press release. Clips looped, Mara entering with triplets. Tristan's stalled smile. Alexander's still composure. Social threads filled with speculation. The people who had once applauded Tristan now passed his silence as evidence that the mirror had been held up to him. Stories began to surface. Private whispers about who had funded the fertility treatment, about whether the babies were conceived through IVF using donor sperm, about whether a quiet man like Alexander was content to be invisible. There were, as always, people ready to weaponize grief for likes. Trolls recirculated Tristan's old derogatory message and paired it with the new images in humiliating juxtaposition. But in the private aftermath, things were more complicated than gratification. Mara, for all her calm, felt exposed in ways she had not predicted. The baby's arrival was joyous and raw. She had fought hard for the possibility of motherhood and had been given it amid white noise. Alexander was protective in ways that were patient rather than performative. He refused to be theatrical and refused to allow Mara's triumph to become another public spectacle. He set boundaries with the press and kept sleep schedules and those small, sacred details that make new parents human. Tristan's world, where influence equaled control, did not crumble all at once. It eroded in tiny ways. Offers for branded content slowed in the days. After the shower, companies woke to the optics and shifted their calculus. An old ally sent a text, supportive-toned but containing a thin edge. Tristan's followers debated him online. Some clung to his side. Others migrated to the new narrative. He called journalists he trusted and offered contrition on camera. But contrition performed for optics is a mirror that shows only the actor. In private, Tristan flailed. He hired publicists, yes, and crisis consultants, yes. But those interventions couldn't buy him what he had once thought came with reputation: unchallenged moral authority. He found himself in rooms where his old jokes no longer landed. He learned, too late, that humiliation he had once handed out tended to return with compound interest when aimed at the wrong person. There were nights he scrolled through footage of Mara with the babies and felt a hollow where triumph used to fit. He tried to craft a narrative of reconciliation, an expensive dinner, a staged conversation on the sofa of a talk show, but those efforts read as contrived. People wanted truth or they wanted spectacle. Tristan had offered neither. Justice arrived in small human increments. It was not a courtroom victory or a viral pile-on. It was Mara's life full to the brim in ways Tristan had refused to imagine when he called her barren. She learned to nurse 3 babies, to laugh thin and loud at shared domestic failures, to ask for help and accept it. She and Alexander established a rhythm, early mornings softened by joint routines, the hush that settles between parents who know the weight of real work. They built a home that did not require constant annotation on social feeds. Alexander did not star in her stories. He was the steady background beat, the kind of partner who rearranged the world to hold another human's needs without making an audience of it. Mara found herself steady in ways she'd feared she could never be, resilient, because the world had not been kind, but honest because their life was chosen, not manufactured. Tristan watched from the margins. He regained some public footing. There's always a market for complicated men, but the ease with which he'd used people had cost him something specific: the right to frame the narrative unchallenged. He had to learn to be smaller in places he had once inflated. There was one evening, months later, when Tristan found Mara alone on a park bench under a whisper of late summer leaves. He approached, slowly, the way someone steps around a sleeping child in the dark. It was not an ambush. It was an attempt at explanation. "I thought I was protecting myself," he said, an admission small but real. "I thought I needed to be untouchable." Mara listened, the babies safely at home, with a trusted sitter and Alexander nearby, though not within earshot. She had learned to speak for herself. "You didn't protect anything," she said without triumph. "You only kept yourself from seeing what was human." There was no dramatic reconciliation. There was no final forgiveness to be plastered across a magazine. There was instead a recognition that people break and sometimes rebuild, that cruelty has consequences, public and private, that a quiet life can be a stronger answer than any spectacle. Months after the baby shower incident, a rumor began to circulate online, quiet at first, tucked into anonymous forums and gossip threads. Someone claimed that Tristan had filed a private petition demanding a DNA test for one of Mara's triplets, alleging that one of the children might be his. The claim was baseless, malicious, and designed to create chaos. But online lies travel faster than truth. Within days, the rumor hit major gossip blogs. The headlines were vicious. Did Tristan secretly father one of the triplets? Billionaire Alexander silent. Is there trouble in paradise? Alexander saw the chaos building but kept his steady composure. Mara, shaken, sleepless, vulnerable, watched strangers dissect her children's parentage. She refused interviews, refused comments, refused to let the media turn motherhood into a circus. But when Tristan saw the rumors, he didn't deny them. He didn't start them, but he let them circulate. He let them stain. Because a part of him, an ugly, insecure part, liked the idea that he still had some power over Mara's life. Alexander's silence was misinterpreted as weakness. Tristan saw it as an opportunity. He began giving interviews with carefully chosen words. "I wish Mara all the best. As long as everything is truly as it seems." And the internet exploded. People wanted answers. People wanted drama. And Tristan fed it with the skill of someone who once fed millions with curated lies. But inside the St. James home, Alexander watched everything with a cold, simmering calm. Not anger. Not competitiveness. Strategy. One evening, he sat across from Mara in their quiet living room. The triplets asleep upstairs. "Mara," he said softly, "I let people mistake my silence for passiveness. I won't let them mistake it for guilt." Mara looked at him with tear-stained eyes. "What are you going to do?" Alexander's answer was simple. "End this." Alexander did not speak to reporters. He did not post a statement. He did not defend himself online. Instead, he hired digital forensic analysts, internet law firms, and private intelligence experts. Within 2 weeks, they found the origin of the rumor. An anonymous account connected to an old marketing assistant linked to Tristan's PR circle. It wasn't definitive proof yet, but it was enough. Alexander set up a legal meeting with Tristan, not as enemies, but as men with something at stake. The meeting took place in a glass tower office overlooking the city. Tristan came dressed in designer arrogance. Alexander walked in wearing quiet precision. Tristan smirked. "So you've come to defend your pride?" Alexander sat, hands calm. "My pride doesn't concern me," he said. "My family does." Something flickered in Tristan's eyes. Jealousy, resentment, fear. It was unclear. But when Alexander slid a folder across the table, filled with evidence, timestamps, traced accounts, Tristan paled. "You can't pin that on me," he snapped. "I don't have to," Alexander replied. "But I can prove you never stopped trying to control Mara." The room chilled. "Retract the rumors," Alexander said. "Publicly, permanently." And for the first time in years, Tristan Vale had no script. The next morning, Tristan posted a video. No filters, no music. No perfect lighting. Just Tristan. And regret. He admitted the rumors were unfounded. He admitted he did not request a DNA test. He admitted his past unreasonable behaviors toward Mara. He never admitted starting the rumor, but the world knew the truth. For the first time in his influencer career, the comment section wasn't applause. It was accountability. But what no one expected was that Tristan broke down at the end of the video. "I thought I lost something when Mara left," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't realize I lost myself long before that." The world softened. Some even pitied him, but Mara didn't. She had lived through the wounds he gave her. And while forgiveness was humane, forgetfulness was impossible. After the confession, Tristan disappeared from the internet. No posts, no appearances, no brand partnerships. It was as if his entire identity evaporated. Meanwhile, Mara and Alexander embraced a quieter chapter, one filled with baby giggles, late-night feedings, and soft beginnings. But then, an envelope arrived at their mansion. No return address, no signature. Inside was a handwritten note, in Tristan's familiar handwriting. "Thank you for showing me the life I could have had if I wasn't blinded by myself. If you ever need help, I owe you more than I can repay. T." Mara stared at the letter for a long time. Alexander read it once, then locked it away in a private drawer. But neither of them knew. This was not Tristan's exit. It was his return, because something was coming. Something that would drag all three of their lives back into the same unforgiving spotlight. Years later, the triplets played in a garden that was never designed for the camera. Mara and Alexander watched with a kind of plain astonishment at what ordinary joy could look like. Tristan occasionally remained a presence, sometimes a thought, sometimes a headline. He had learned restraint the hard way. Maybe he had learned empathy too late. The world has moved on as it always does. For Mara, the story's victory was not vengeance. It was presence, their small bodies curled against her chest late at night. Alexander's hand warm at the small of her back. The quiet dinners that needed no audience. That was the rebuke to a man who believed a pipe, swagger, and a megaphone were the same thing as a life well lived. And yet the last line of the story leaves room. Tristan, watching from the next town over, posts less and listens more. The world that once adored him reshapes its opinion with the slow fairness of time. The babies become toddlers who will one day ask their mother where they came from. She will choose to tell them the whole messy truth, because truth is a gift that requires no performance. There will always be people who clap loudly at someone's fall and others who keep the lamp lit while quiet people build new rooms. That, in the end, matters more. 2 nights later, Mara received a private message from an unknown account. You think you know the truth about your triplets, but you don't. Ask Tristan what happened the night you collapsed. Her hands trembled. She stared at the message. Alexander walked into the room slowly. What's wrong? He asked. Mara lifted the phone with shaking fingers. And somewhere in the city, Tristan's phone began ringing. He stared at the caller ID. Mara, and he whispered, Oh God, she finally knows. To be continued. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the darkest truths, deepest betrayals, and shocking twists of fate. Turn on your notification bell so you never miss the next chapter, because trust me, the truth behind Mara's triplets is far darker than anyone ever imagined.